The Superior Court of Manhattan falls silent as Angela Thompson takes her seat at the witness stand, her waitress uniform replaced by a modest blue dress, while corporate mogul Richard Sterling watches from the defense table, his usual arrogant demeanor slightly dimmed by the gravity of the discrimination lawsuit. Before him, the morning light filtering through the tall windows casts long shadows across the polished wooden floors of courtroom 302, where Judge Diana Rodriguez prepares to hear one of the most controversial discrimination cases of the year. Angela adjusts the collar of her dress, her fingers moving with the same grace they possessed on the piano keys that fateful night at LeBlanc, while the gallery's wooden benches creak under the weight of reporters, civil rights activists, and curious onlookers who have gathered to witness the confrontation between a waitress and one of New York's most powerful business figures. The air feels thick with anticipation as the court bailiff adjusts the microphone at the witness stand. In the front row, Angela's mother, Martha Thompson, sits with quiet dignity, her gray hair neatly arranged beneath a small hat that she saves for special occasions, her weathered hands clutching a warm leather purse containing newspaper clippings of her daughter's past piano recitals from a life that seemed distant now. Beside her sits Reverend Michael Clark from their local church, his presence a silent reminder of the community's support for Angela in her fight for justice. Richard Sterling cuts an imposing figure in his tailored charcoal suit, a stark contrast to the more modest attire of Angela's supporters. His legal team surrounds him like a protective barrier, their designer briefcases and leather portfolios displaying the wealth and power they represent. Sterling keeps his eyes fixed on his phone, pretending to review important emails, while actively avoiding eye contact with the young woman whose dignity he had attempted to strip away that night at his favorite restaurant. The gallery whispers cease as District Attorney Marcus Chen organizes his documents at the prosecution table, his reputation for handling high-profile civil rights cases evident in his methodical preparation. His assistant slides a folder containing security camera stills from LeBlanc, showing the exact moment Sterling had pointed at the piano, his face twisted in what he had thought would be an amusing display of power over someone he deemed beneath him. Through the thick courtroom windows, the sounds of Manhattan traffic create a distant urban symphony, while inside the tension builds as Judge Rodriguez reviews the case files, her years of experience visible in a careful way. She examines each document, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose as she takes in the details of the incident that brought them all here today. A case that began as a simple dinner service, but evolved into a powerful statement about prejudice, privilege, and the assumptions people make about others based on their occupation and appearance. At the defense table, Catherine Wells Sterling's lead attorney whispers strategy adjustments to her client, her perfectly manicured nails tapping silently against her tablet. As she reviews their planned defense, her eyes occasionally darting to Angela, measuring the quiet confidence that seems to radiate from the young woman who had surprised them all that night. Several members of her legal team shuffle papers and exchange knowing looks, their expensive suits and confident demeanors masking their growing concern about the strong case the prosecution has built. The morning sun continues its journey across the courtroom floor as the clerk begins organizing the day's proceedings. The American flag behind the judge's bench catches a slight breeze from the air conditioning system, its gentle movement a reminder of the principles of justice and equality that this case represents. Angela sits straighter in her chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, the same hands that had shocked Sterling and his associates into silence with their mastery of Chopin. In the second row, James Peterson, the manager of LeBlanc, shifts uncomfortably in his seat, knowing his testimony about Sterling's frequent visits and previous behavior towards staff members could damage his restaurant's reputation, but feeling compelled to speak the truth about what he had witnessed over the years, his presence adds another layer of credibility to Angela's case, despite the potential consequences to his career. The courtroom deputies maintain their vigilant watch as more spectators attempt to quietly enter the already crowded space, their shoes squeaking against the freshly polished floor, while they search for any remaining seats. The historical significance of the case drawing unprecedented attention from both local and national media, with sketch artists capturing the scene from various angles, their pencils moving swiftly across paper. As the clerk calls the court to order, Angela takes a deep breath, her mother's words from that morning echoing in her mind, reminding her that she represents not just herself, but everyone who has ever been judged, dismissed, or humiliated based on prejudiced assumptions. The weight of this responsibility visible in her straight posture and determined expression as she prepares to share her story with the court, While Sterling finally looks up from his phone, his face a mask of practiced indifference that fails to completely hide his concern about the proceedings about to unfold. District Attorney Marcus Chen approaches the stand as Angela describes the events at the upscale restaurant Le Blanc, where Sterling and his business associates had demanded she play the grand piano for their entertainment, assuming she would embarrass herself, while other patrons watched uncomfortably. His measured steps across the courtroom floor mirror the deliberate pace of his questioning strategy as he prepares to reveal the full extent of that night's events. Angela speaks with quiet strength, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom as she recounts arriving for her regular evening shift at Le Blanc, the crisp white apron of her uniform still fresh from the dry cleaners, her sensible shoes polished to meet the restaurant's exacting standards. When Sterling and his party of 8 executives had arrived demanding the best table in the house, their loud voices and expensive suits drawing attention from other diners even before the incident began. The jury listens intently as she describes how Sterling had spotted the grand piano in the corner, its polished ebony surface gleaming under the restaurant's soft lighting, while he held court at his table, entertaining his associates with stories of his latest business acquisitions and real estate developments, his voice growing louder with each glass of premium wine the sommelier poured into his crystal glass. Chen produces photographs of the restaurant's layout, marking the exact position of Sterling's table in relation to the piano, while Angela continues her testimony, describing how Sterling had interrupted her as she recited the evening's specials, his eyes narrowing with amusement as he pointed to the piano and loudly proclaimed that the help should provide some entertainment for his distinguished guests. Several jurors shake their heads slightly at this detail, while Sterling adjusts his tie uncomfortably. The testimony reveals how other patrons had stopped eating, their expressions a mix of discomfort and concern as Sterling rose from his chair, gesturing dramatically toward the piano while making exaggerated movements as if playing an invisible instrument, his associates laughing on cue, though a few seemed to share the discomfort visible on the faces of nearby diners. Angela recalls how the restaurant's manager, James Peterson, has started to intervene before Sterling waved him away with the promise of an exceptionally generous tip. Through the window of the courtroom, a passing cloud temporarily dims the natural light as Angela describes the heady silence that fell over the dining room when she quietly set down her order pad and walked toward the piano, her steps steady despite the mixture of emotions churning inside her. She remembers catching a glimpse of her reflection in the piano's surface, seeing not just herself, but her mother, who had worked 2 jobs to maintain her daughter's piano lessons until family circumstances had forced Angela to set aside her dreams of a career in music. The prosecution presents receipts from that evening showing the excessive amount of alcohol consumed at Sterling's table, while Angela continues explaining how Sterling had turned to his guests with an exaggerated wink, promising them entertainment that would be worth recording on their phones. Several of the executives had already raised their devices, anticipating what they assumed would be a humiliating display, their cruel laughter echoing off the restaurant's expensive wallpaper. Catherine Wells objects to the introduction of character evidence, but Judge Rodriguez overrules her as Angela describes the subtle signs of Sterling's prejudice throughout the evening, from his dismissive gestures when she approached the table to his loud comments about the help knowing their place when she had initially hesitated to approach the piano. The jury appears particularly moved by her description of how younger patrons at nearby tables had begun to record the scene on their phones, expecting a social media-worthy moment of public humiliation. The courtroom remains silent as Angela recounts the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders as she adjusted the piano bench, remembering her mother's words about dignity in the face of prejudice, and her father's lessons about standing tall when others try to diminish you. Chen presents maintenance records showing the piano was kept in perfect tune, a detail that would prove significant as the events of the evening unfolded. Sterling shifts in his chair as Angela describes how he had turned to face the dining room like a ringmaster at a circus, his voice carrying across the space as he announced that their waitress would now demonstrate her musical talents, his sarcasm evident in every word, while his associates settled in for what they assumed would be brief entertainment at someone else's expense, the restaurant staff hovering uncertainly at the edges of the dining room, their own experiences with similar treatment reflected in their concerned expressions. The testimony builds toward the moment when Angela had lifted her hands above the keys, the dining room falling completely silent as she prepared to play, while Sterling watched with smug satisfaction, convinced he had orchestrated a moment of supreme embarrassment for his own amusement, unaware that the young woman he had targeted held a secret that would transform his attempt at humiliation into something entirely unexpected. Security footage plays silently on the courtroom screens, showing Sterling gesturing mockingly toward the piano, his laughter evident even without sound, while Angela stands composed, her years of classical training from Juilliard unknown to him. As she approaches the instrument with quiet dignity, the large display monitors positioned strategically around the courtroom ensure that every person present can witness the events that unfolded that fateful evening at Leblanc's. The black and white footage captures every detail of the dining room from multiple angles, the restaurant's security system providing an unblinking record of Sterling's behavior as he performs for his audience of executives, their faces reflecting varying degrees of discomfort and cruel anticipation, while other diners cast worried glances at their phones, some already recording what they assumed would be a moment of public humiliation. Chen pauses the footage at key moments, highlighting Sterling's expansive gestures and contemptuous expression. Judge Margaret Wilson leans forward in her chair, her wire-rimmed glasses catching the light as she studies the footage with particular attention to the body language of everyone involved, her 30 years on the bench having taught her to read the subtle signs of power dynamics at play in human interactions. Her expression remains neutral, but her eyes narrow slightly as Sterling makes an especially mocking gesture toward Angela on the screen. The prosecution introduces a second set of cameras showing the dining room from the opposite angle, capturing the reactions of other patrons as the scene unfolds, their discomfort clearly visible in their rigid postures and averted gazes, while the restaurant staff hover at the edges of the frame, their own experiences with similar treatment evident in their tense expressions. Several jury members lean forward as Chen highlights a young couple who appear to be discussing whether to intervene. Angela maintains her composure as the footage plays, her eyes steady while watching her past self navigate the carefully orchestrated humiliation that Sterling had planned, the cameras catching the exact moment she squares her shoulders before sitting at the piano bench, her movements displaying a familiarity with the instrument that Sterling and his associates were too caught up in their presumed superiority to notice. The courtroom watches as the silent footage shows Angela adjusting the piano bench with practiced ease, her movements precise and confident, while Sterling turns to his companions with an exaggerated gesture of anticipation, the cameras catching his smug smile as he settles back in his chair like a monarch preparing to be entertained. Several jurors shift uncomfortably in their seats as they observe the obvious prejudice and power dynamics on display. Chen pauses the playback to introduce testimony from the restaurant's assistant manager, Lisa Chen, no relation, who describes the tense atmosphere in the dining room that evening, her statement corroborating the visual evidence as she recalls how Sterling had commanded, rather than requested, that Angela play, specifically choosing words meant to emphasize what he perceived as her lower status. The security footage resumes, showing Lisa standing near the kitchen entrance, her concern evident even in the grainy video. The footage continues, displaying the exact moment Angela places her hands on the keys, her posture transforming subtly as muscle memory from years of training takes over. The cameras capture Sterling leaning forward, his expression still fixed in anticipation of the entertainment he'd assumes held derived from her discomfort, while his associates ready their phones to record what they expect to be a social media-worthy moment of embarrassment. Judge Wilson calls for a brief pause in the presentation, allowing the court reporter to catch up with the proceedings while the footage remains frozen on the screen, showing Angela seated at the piano, her back straight, her head held high, in stark contrast to the mocking behavior displayed by Sterling and his group. The still image speaks volumes about the dignity of one and the prejudice of others. As the presentation resumes, Chen introduces additional camera angles showing the reactions of the kitchen staff who had gathered at the service entrance, having heard about Sterling's demands, their faces reflecting a mixture of concern for their colleague and resignation, born from experiencing similar treatment themselves. The footage captures the restaurant owner, Marcus Dubois, watching from his office doorway, his expression troubled, as he witnesses the scene unfolding in his establishment. The security footage continues in silence, building tension as it approaches the moment when Angela would reveal her true capabilities, the cameras catching every detail of Sterling's continued performance for his audience, his gestures becoming more exaggerated as he assumes his moment of triumph approaches, while Angela remains perfectly still at the piano, her fingers hovering above the keys in a position that any trained musician would recognize as completely professional. The courtroom remains transfixed as the footage shows the final seconds before Angela begins to play, the anticipation visible on every face in the dining room for entirely different reasons than Sterling had intended, the cameras capturing the last confident smirk he would display that evening before everything he thought he knew about the young woman he had tried to humiliate would be transformed by the first notes of Chopin's ballade, no one in G minor. The jury leans forward as video evidence continues revealing the dramatic shift in Sterling's expression as Angela's fingers dance across the keys performing Chopin's ballade, no one in G minor, her talent transforming the restaurant's atmosphere, while Sterling sits speechless, his mockery turned to disbelief, the footage now accompanied by the restaurant's audio system, which had captured every crystalline note of her masterful performance. District Attorney Chen introduces the audio recording, letting the first sweeping notes fill the courtroom, their pristine quality a testament to the restaurant's high-end sound system. Several jurors close their eyes, absorbing the beauty of the piece, while Sterling stares straight ahead, his jaw clenched, as he relives the moment his attempted humiliation transformed into his own public embarrassment, the security footage showing his expression cycling through disbelief, confusion, and finally uncomfortable recognition of his own prejudice. The video captures the exact moment the other diners realize they are witnessing something extraordinary. Phones initially raised to record an expected moment of cruel entertainment now document a stunning display of artistic mastery as Angela performs one of the most challenging pieces in the classical piano repertoire, her years of training evident in every confident movement of her hands across the keyboards. Restaurant staff members testifying about that evening described the profound silence that fell over the dining room as Angela played the security footage showing servers pausing mid-step, wine glasses suspended in mid-pour. As the music filled every corner of the space, even the kitchen staff, normally rushing to prepare elegant dishes, stand transfixed in the doorway, their faces illuminated by the warm restaurant lighting as they witness their colleague's transformation from server to virtuoso. Chen presents a series of social media posts from that evening showing how quickly the narrative changed from what Sterling had intended, as several guests, who had begun recording expecting to capture a moment of mockery, instead shared clips of Angela's extraordinary performance, their captions expressing outrage at Sterling's behavior and admiration for Angela's dignity and talent, the posts having gone viral within hours of the incident. The security footage continues showing Sterling attempting to maintain his composure as Angela moves through the complex emotional passages of the ballade, his dinner companions lowering their phones one by one, their expressions shifting from anticipatory cruelty to genuine awe, while nearby diners begin to record Sterling's discomfort as much as Angela's performance. Several jury members exchange knowing looks as they observe his growing realization of his grave miscalculation. Expert witness Dar Victoria Chen, a renowned concert pianist, takes the stand as the video plays, confirming the exceptional difficulty of the chosen piece and noting Angela's technical precision and emotional interpretation, her testimony adding weight to the evidence that Angela possessed professional-level skills that Sterling had dismissed without consideration, based solely on her current occupation as a waitress. The courtroom watches as the footage shows other restaurant patrons beginning to understand the full scope of what they are witnessing, their faces reflecting growing appreciation for the music and increasing disapproval of Sterling and his group's behavior. Several elderly couples, who clearly recognize the piece, shake their heads in obvious dismay at how Sterling had attempted to use such an accomplished musician's skill as a source of mockery. Angela maintains her professional composure as the video shows her younger self lost in the music, her movements fluid and confident as she navigates the piece's challenging runs and emotional swells, the cameras catching how even the most jaded of Sterling's associates appears moved by the unexpected beauty filling the restaurant, their phones now lowered, forgotten in their laps as they witness true artistry. The prosecution introduces statements from other diners that evening describing how the atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted dramatically as Angela played their testimony, corroborated by the security footage showing people at neighboring tables turning away from their expensive meals to give their full attention to the impromptu concert, while Sterling sits increasingly rigid in his chair, his face flushing as he realizes his attempt at asserting superiority has backfired spectacularly. As the piece approaches its powerful conclusion, the video shows the restaurant manager James Peterson moving quietly through the room, ensuring the staff maintains their professional duties. Despite the extraordinary circumstances, his own expression a mixture of pride in his employee and poorly concealed satisfaction at witnessing Sterling's comeuppance, the footage revealing how several of Sterling's dinner companions begin to distance themselves physically from him, sliding their chairs slightly away as the magnitude of his error becomes increasingly apparent. The security footage captures the final moments of the performance as Angela brings the piece to its conclusion, her technique flawless, her dignity intact, while Sterling sits in stunned silence, his wine glass untouched, his previous bombastic behavior replaced by an uncomfortable awareness of his own prejudiced assumptions. the cameras recording the spontaneous applause that erupts throughout the dining room as she rises from the piano bench, straightens her apron, and with perfect composure returns to Sterling's table to ask if they are ready to order their meals. Defense attorney Catherine Wells attempts to paint the incident as a simple misunderstanding but crumbles as previous employees testify about Sterling's pattern of discriminatory behavior toward minority staff members at his various business establishments, her carefully constructed defense strategy beginning to unravel as witness after witness approaches the stand their stories, creating a damning pattern of behavior that spans years across multiple Sterling Group properties. Maria Rodriguez, a former hostess at Sterling's flagship restaurant, takes the stand, her testimony describing similar incidents where Sterling had humiliated service staff for his own entertainment, her voice steady as she recounts how he would often make staff members perform unnecessary tasks simply to demonstrate his power over them. The jury paying close attention as she describes how he would require employees with accents to repeat themselves unnecessarily while his business associates laughed. The prosecution presents employee turnover records from 5 Sterling Group establishments showing a disturbing pattern of minority staff members leaving shortly after experiencing direct interactions with Sterling himself. The data displayed on large screens throughout the courtroom revealing how the average tenure of minority employees was significantly shorter than their non-minority counterparts, several jurors taking careful notes as the statistical evidence mounts. Former Sterling Group HR Director Thomas Bradford appears particularly uncomfortable as he testifies about the numerous complaints that had crossed his desk over the years, his testimony revealing how Sterling had dismissed concerns about his behavior as oversensitivity, explaining away each incident with practiced excuses about maintaining standards. The documentation projected on the courtroom screens showing how complaints were systematically buried or dismissed without proper investigation. Wells attempts to object to the introduction of previous incidents, but Judge Rodriguez allows the testimony, citing its relevance in establishing a pattern of behavior, her years of experience evident in how she handles the delicate balance between protecting Sterling's right to defend himself and ensuring all relevant evidence is presented to the jury, her ruling sending a ripple of whispers through the gathered spectators. Security footage from various Sterling Group properties plays on the courtroom screens showing similar incidents where Sterling had used his position of power to demean employees of color, the combined effect of the videos creating a devastating portrait of a man who regularly wielded his wealth and influence as weapons of humiliation. Shen methodically introducing each clip with corresponding testimony from affected employees, their stories collaborating the visual evidence. The testimony shifts to focus on the psychological impact of such workplace discrimination, as Dr. James Harrison, a noted expert in workplace trauma, takes the stand explaining how public humiliation, particularly when tied to racial or ethnic background, can create lasting damage to both individuals and workplace culture. His academic credentials displayed on screen as he describes the ripple effects of discriminatory behavior throughout an organization. Sterling maintains his composed exterior, but his leg bounces nervously under the defense table as more former employees describe their experiences. His carefully maintained public image of a successful businessman philanthropist crumbling under the weight of first-hand accounts of his behavior. Several of his current executives in attendance shift uncomfortably in their seats as they recognize their own complicity in enabling his actions. The courtroom grows increasingly tense as Chen presents internal communications from Sterling Group executives discussing how to handle discrimination complaints, some emails revealing conscious efforts to discourage formal reports and protect the company's reputation. Wells attempts to exclude the emails, citing attorney-client privilege, but Judge Rodriguez determines they fall under exceptions for evidence of ongoing discriminatory practices. Angela sits quietly through the testimony, her presence a silent reminder of how one incident at LeBlanc had finally brought years of systematic discrimination to light, her dignity in the face of attempted humiliation, having inspired others to come forward with their own stories, the jury occasionally glancing in her direction as they connect her experience to the larger pattern being revealed. Former Sterling Group Vice President Patricia Morrison provides particularly damaging testimony describing executive-level discussions about maintaining the right image in Sterling properties, her voice steady as she recounts how Sterling would often make hiring decisions based on appearance and background rather than qualifications, the documentation supporting her claims appearing on screen as she speaks, her recent resignation date noted in the corner of her employee file. The prosecution introduces statistics showing hiring patterns across Sterling Group properties over the past decade, the data revealing clear disparities in both hiring and promotion practices, particularly in customer-facing positions. Chen methodically walking through the numbers as Sterling stares straight ahead, his usual confident demeanor showing clear cracks as the evidence continues to mount. Wells attempts to redirect the narrative by suggesting these were isolated incidents handled appropriately through company channels, but her arguments lose strength as Chen presents documentation showing systematic failures to address discriminatory behavior, the paper trail revealing how complaints would disappear into administrative limbo, while affected employees often found themselves relocated or dismissed for minor infractions. As the day nears its end, Judge Rodriguez calls for a brief recess, the weight of accumulated testimony hanging heavy in the courtroom air, while Sterling whispers urgently to his legal team, their concerned expressions suggesting they recognize how their strategy of dismissing the LeBlanc incident as a simple misunderstanding has been thoroughly undermined by the mountain of evidence showing it was merely one example in a long pattern of discriminatory behavior. Expert witness Dar James Morrison, a sociologist specializing in workplace discrimination, provides context about the historical significance of forcing service workers to perform for entertainment, drawing parallels that make several jurors shift uncomfortably in their seats. His testimony beginning with a comprehensive overview of how public performance has been historically used as a tool of racial and social oppression throughout various periods in American history. Dar Morrison gestures to his prepared slides showing archival photographs and documentation of similar historical incidents where wealthy individuals would command employees or servants to perform for their entertainment, his academic perspective lending weight to the connection between Sterling's behavior at LeBlanc and broader patterns of discriminatory power dynamics, several jury members taking careful notes as he explains how such demands for performance often served to reinforce social hierarchies. The courtroom falls silent as Dar Morrison presents specific examples from the early 20th century through the present day, demonstrating how forced performance, regardless of the performer's actual talent, has been used to assert dominance and control. His analysis supported by decades of research and peer-reviewed studies, Chen skillfully guiding his testimony to highlight the psychological impact on both the individual and the broader community. Sterling appears increasingly agitated as Dar Morrison explains how the modern workplace often perpetuates historical power imbalances through more subtle forms of discrimination, his testimony revealing how demands for performance, particularly when targeted at minority employees, can create hostile work environments even when disguised as entertainment or team building. Several of Sterling's current executives in attendance begin to look distinctly uncomfortable. The expert testimony shifts to focus on the specific impact of public humiliation in professional settings, Dr. Morrison sharing research data showing how incidents like the one at LeBlanc can affect workplace culture and employee well-being. His presentation, including anonymous surveys from various industries, demonstrating how such experiences often go unreported due to fear of retaliation or career damage. Wells attempts to challenge Dar Morrison's credentials, but his extensive background in studying workplace power dynamics proves unassailable. His calm recitation of qualifications, including multiple published books and papers on the subject, serving to further emphasize the legitimacy of his analysis. Judge Rodriguez watching with particular interest as he explains the lasting psychological effects of workplace discrimination. The prosecution introduces contemporary examples of similar incidents across different industries, Dar Morrison analyzing how modern forms of discrimination often maintain plausible deniability while achieving the same devastating effects. His testimony drawing direct connections between historical practices and Sterling's behavior at LeBlanc, the jury appearing particularly moved by the parallel patterns he identifies. Angela listens attentively as Dar Morrison explains how victims of such discrimination often face additional pressure to maintain their composure and professionalism even in the face of humiliation. His analysis perfectly describing her own experience at night at the piano, several jurors glancing between her and Sterling as the expert elaborates on the psychological strength required to maintain dignity in such situations. The testimony expands to address the broader societal implications of allowing such behavior to go unchallenged. Dr. Morrison, presenting statistics showing how unchecked discrimination in high-profile cases can encourage similar behavior throughout an organization. His data revealing how leadership behavior sets precedents that multiply throughout corporate culture, creating systemic problems that affect countless employees. Shen guides the testimony toward the specific impact of public performance demands. Dar Morrison, explaining how requiring employees to perform outside their assigned duties, particularly when done to entertain others, can constitute a form of workplace harassment. His analysis, supported by numerous case studies and legal precedents that demonstrate the harmful nature of such demands. The courtroom watches as Dar Morrison presents a framework for understanding how power and privilege intersect in workplace interactions. His academic perspective, helping to contextualize Sterling's behavior within broader patterns of discrimination. Several jury members nodding in recognition as he describes how seemingly isolated incidents often reflect deeper systemic issues. Sterling maintains his composed exterior, but his legal team appears increasingly concerned as Dar Morrison methodically connects their client's behavior to well-documented patterns of discrimination. The expert testimony systematically dismantling their defense strategy of presenting the LeBlanc incident as a simple misunderstanding or failed attempt at workplace camaraderie. The presentation continues with Dar Morrison sharing research on how discrimination affects employee performance and career advancement. His studies showing the cumulative impact of seemingly minor incidents on workplace culture and individual well-being. The data, particularly relevant given the earlier testimony about employee turnover rates at Sterling Group properties. As the expert testimony draws to a close, Dar Morrison addresses the significance of Angela's response to Sterling's attempt at humiliation, explaining how her exceptional performance, while maintaining professional composure, challenged traditional power dynamics in ways that made her case particularly noteworthy. His academic analysis helping to frame the incident within larger conversations about workplace equality and justice. Judge Rodriguez calls for the afternoon break as Dar Morrison's testimony concludes, the weight of his expert analysis hanging in the courtroom air, while Sterling confers urgently with his legal team, their expressions suggesting they recognize how the academic perspective has strengthened the prosecution's case by placing their client's behavior within a broader historical and sociological context that will be difficult to dismiss or explain away. Sterling takes the stand, his corporate polish failing to mask his discomfort as Chen presents evidence of similar incidents at his companies, while Angela sits quietly beside her lawyer, her hands folded in her lap, the same hands that had proven her worth on that grand piano. His testimony beginning with carefully rehearsed responses that quickly begin to unravel under Chen's methodical questioning. The prosecution displays a series of emails from Sterling's personal account revealing conversations with other executives about maintaining the right atmosphere in his establishments, the messages containing coded language about employee appearances and backgrounds that takes on new meaning in light of the previous testimony about discrimination. Shen methodically walking Sterling through each message, asking him to explain the context of particularly damaging phrases. Sterling shifts uncomfortably in the witness chair as Chen presents security footage from other incidents at his properties, the combined evidence creating a pattern that becomes increasingly difficult to explain away, his usual commanding presence diminishing as he struggles to justify actions that seem indefensible when viewed in sequence. Several jurors taking notes as he attempts to reframe clearly discriminatory behavior as legitimate business decisions. The courtroom grows tense as Chen produces documentation showing how Sterling had personally intervened in hiring decisions at his properties, particularly when candidates from certain backgrounds had applied for visible positions, his testimony becoming increasingly defensive as he attempts to explain away the clear pattern of discrimination revealed in his own handwritten notes and email communications. Previous incidents of employee humiliation emerged through internal complaint records, Sterling attempting to dismiss each as a misunderstanding or joke taken too seriously, his credibility further eroding as Chen methodically connects these incidents to significant patterns in employee turnover and withdrawal of complaints following private meetings with upper management, the documentation revealing a systematic approach to silencing discrimination claims. Angela maintains her professional composure as Sterling repeatedly glances in her direction, his testimony now focusing on the night at LeBlanc, attempting to frame his demand for her performance as an opportunity rather than humiliation, the jury watching intently as he struggles to justify his actions in light of the extensive evidence of similar behavior throughout his organization. Shen introduces statements from former Sterling Group executives who had witnessed his pattern of behavior firsthand, their testimonies describing how he would often create situations designed to reinforce social hierarchies, particularly with minority employees, Sterling becoming visibly agitated as former allies break ranks to confirm his discriminatory practices, their statements corroborating the broader pattern established by previous witnesses. The prosecution presents financial records showing settlements paid to former employees who had filed discrimination complaints, Sterling attempting to characterize these payments as routine business decisions, rather than admissions of wrongdoing, his explanation growing less convincing as Chen reveals the pattern of increased settlements following particularly public incidents at his properties. Sterling attempts to portray himself as a businessman focused solely on maintaining high standards in his establishments, but his testimony falters as Chen introduces performance reviews showing how minority employees consistently received lower ratings despite similar or superior qualifications, the data revealing systematic barriers to advancement within his organization. The courtroom watches as Sterling struggles to explain his reaction to Angela's piano performance, the security footage showing his clear intention to humiliate contrasted sharply with his current testimony about encouraging employee talents, his attempts to rewrite the narrative undermined by the clear visual evidence and corroborating witness statements. Chen methodically leads Sterling through his history of similar incidents at charity events and social gatherings where he had demanded impromptu performances from service staff, his pattern of behavior becoming increasingly clear as more evidence is presented, several jurors shaking their heads as he attempts to justify each incident as innocent entertainment. The testimony turns to examine Sterling's response after the LeBlanc incident, social media posts, and internal communications revealing his initial anger at being upstaged rather than any recognition of his inappropriate behavior, his attempts to retaliate through corporate channels documented in emails and text messages that he now struggles to explain. Sterling grows increasingly defensive as Chen presents evidence of systematic attempts to discredit Angela following the incident, internal memos revealing how his organization had attempted to investigate her background, looking for anything that could diminish her credibility, the documentation showing a coordinated effort to protect his reputation at her expense. The prosecution introduces expert analysis of Sterling's public statements following the incident, highlighting the disconnect between his carefully crafted public apologies and his private actions, the evidence revealing how his organization had worked to minimize the significance of the event while simultaneously attempting to discourage other employees from speaking out. As the afternoon wears on, Sterling's testimony becomes increasingly contradictory, his attempts to maintain his corporate persona crumbling under the weight of accumulated evidence, several jury members exchanging glances as he struggles to reconcile his current claims of innocence with a clear pattern of behavior documented in videos, emails, and witness statements. Judge Rodriguez watches carefully as Sterling begins to show signs of frustration, his carefully maintained facade cracking as Chen continues to present evidence that contradicts his testimony, the courtroom falling silent as he finally confronts the full impact of his actions laid bare through years of documented discrimination and systematic attempts to cover his tracks. The courtroom buzzes with tension as Angela's former piano instructor from Juilliard testifies about her exceptional talent and the scholarship she had earned before family obligations forced her to put her music career on hold, revealing the depth of Sterling's prejudiced assumptions. Dr. Eleanor Matthews, now in her 70s, carries herself with the dignified bearing of someone who has spent decades nurturing musical talent, her silver hair elegantly styled as she takes the stand. Dr. Matthews' testimony begins with her credentials as a renowned piano instructor, having taught some of the most celebrated contemporary classical pianists, her reputation lending additional weight to her assessment of Angela's abilities, the jury listening intently as she describes first meeting Angela at a community music program for gifted youth, where the young girl's natural talent had immediately caught her attention. The prosecution presents archived footage of Angela's scholarship audition at Juilliard, showing a younger version of her performing the very same Chopin piece she had played at LeBlanc. Dr. Matthews providing expert commentary on the technical difficulty of the piece and the exceptional skill required to perform it, the video evidence serving to further highlight the absurdity of Sterling's assumptions about her capabilities. Sterling watches uncomfortably as Dr. Matthews describes Angela's rapid progress through the prestigious music program, her talent marking her as one of the most promising pianists of her generation before family circumstances had forced her to leave school and seek immediate employment, the testimony revealing how Angela had chosen to help support her family after her father's sudden illness rather than pursue her musical dreams. The courtroom falls silent as Dr. Matthews reads from Angela's scholarship recommendation letters, the words painting a portrait of a gifted musician whose dedication and natural ability had impressed every instructor she encountered. Chen carefully guiding the testimony to establish the stark contrast between Angela's proven capabilities and Sterling's prejudiced attempt to humiliate her. Personal records from Angela's time at Juilliard appear on the courtroom screens showing her exceptional grades and performance evaluations, Dr. Matthews' voice filling with pride as she describes her former students' achievements, the documentation providing irrefutable evidence of the formal classical training that Sterling had so dismissively ignored that night at LeBlanc. The testimony shifts to focus on the cultural significance of Chopin's Ballade, known in G minor, Dr. Matthews explaining how the piece is considered one of the most challenging in the classical piano repertoire, her expert analysis helping the jury understand the level of skill required to perform it, particularly without preparation or warm-up as Angela had done that evening at the restaurant. Sterling appears increasingly uncomfortable as Dr. Matthews describes the years of dedication required to master such complex pieces, her testimony highlighting how Angela's ability to perform the ballade flawlessly on demand demonstrated not just natural talent but thousands of hours of disciplined practice, several jurors nodding in understanding as they connect this evidence to their memory of the restaurant security footage. The prosecution introduces letters from other music professionals who had worked with Angela during her time at Juilliard, their words consistently praising her exceptional ability and professional dedication, Dr. Matthews providing context for their assessments while explaining how rare it is to encounter. The courtroom watches as Chen presents documentation of various prestigious performance opportunities Angela had been offered before having to withdraw from Juilliard, the evidence further emphasizing how Sterling's attempt at humiliation had backfired by accidentally revealing the presence of world-class talent behind the waitress uniform he had so quickly dismissed. Dr. Matthews' testimony turns to the technical aspects of Angela's LeBlanc performance, her expert analysis of the security footage, confirming that despite years away from formal study, Angela had maintained professional-level skills, the jury paying close attention as she breaks down the complexity of the piece and the mastery required to perform it. Sterling shifts uncomfortably in his chair as Dr. Matthews explains how Angela's ability to perform such a challenging piece flawlessly under pressure spoke not just to her musical talent, but to her strength of character, the testimony helping to frame the incident as a moment where prejudice and assumption had been thoroughly defeated by genuine excellence. The prosecution presents evaluations from Angela's final performance at Juilliard. Before her departure, Dr. Matthews' voice carrying clearly through the courtroom as she describes how even then it had been clear that Angela possessed rare talent that deserved recognition and respect regardless of her current occupation or circumstances. As Dr. Matthews' testimony draws to a close, she addresses the broader implications of assuming someone's capabilities based on their current position, her years of experience lending authority to her observation that true talent and dignity can exist in any profession, the jury appearing particularly moved by this perspective from someone who had dedicated her life to nurturing artistic excellence. Judge Diana Rodriguez delivers her verdict not only on the validity of the discrimination claim, but on the Sterling Group's future as she addresses the packed courtroom, her years of experience evident in her measured tone as she prepares to conclude one of the most closely watched discrimination cases in recent memory, the afternoon sun casting long shadows through the high windows, while every person present leans forward in anticipation. The judge begins by summarizing the extensive evidence presented throughout the trial, her voice carrying clearly as she recounts the pattern of discriminatory behavior documented across Sterling Group properties, the security footage, witness testimony, and internal communications, combining to create an undeniable picture of systematic discrimination that could no longer be dismissed as isolated incidents. Sterling sits rigidly at the defense table, his usual confident demeanor replaced by tense anticipation as Judge Rodriguez addresses the specific incident at LeBlanc, her analysis methodically connecting his actions that evening to the broader pattern of discrimination. Revealed during the trial, his attorneys exchanging worried glances as the judge's tone suggests an unfavorable outcome. The courtroom remains silent as Judge Rodriguez announces the court's finding that Sterling and his organization had engaged in systematic discrimination, creating hostile work environments across multiple properties, her ruling supported by detailed citations of evidence and legal precedent, while several jury members nod in agreement with her assessment of the case. Angela maintains her characteristic composure as the judge orders the Sterling Group to pay substantial compensatory damages, her ruling including specific provisions for workplace reform and mandatory sensitivity training throughout the organization. The decision aimed not just at addressing past wrongs, but at preventing future incidents of discrimination. The judge's verdict extends beyond monetary compensation, including requirements for the Sterling Group to establish new hiring and promotion practices with regular external audits to ensure compliance. Her ruling, creating a framework for systematic change that would affect all of Sterling's business operations, several corporate lawyers in attendance taking careful notes of the sweeping reforms. Judge Rodriguez addresses the broader implications of the case, her verdict emphasizing how positions of power carry responsibilities to treat all employees with dignity and respect, regardless of their current role, her words carrying particular weight, as she describes how assumptions about capability based on employment status reflect deeper prejudices that have no place in modern society. The gallery listens intently as the judge orders the creation of an independent oversight committee to monitor Sterling Group hiring and promotion practices for the next 5 years, her ruling including specific benchmarks and reporting requirements designed to ensure meaningful change throughout the organization, rather than superficial compliance. Sterling appears increasingly deflated as Judge Rodriguez outlines additional requirements, including mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all management personnel, and the establishment of clear reporting procedures for discrimination complaints, her verdict systematically addressing each aspect of the toxic corporate culture revealed during the trial. The judge particularly emphasizes the importance of creating safe channels for employees to report discrimination, her ruling including specific protections for whistleblowers and clear consequences for any retaliation against employees who come forward with complaints. Several former Sterling Group employees in attendance nodding in appreciation of these protective measures. Angela catches her mother's eye in the gallery as Judge Rodriguez praises her courage in bringing the case forward, noting how her dignity in the face of attempted humiliation had helped expose systematic discrimination that affected countless others, the judge's words acknowledging both the personal and broader social impact of standing up against workplace discrimination. The verdict includes provisions for regular cultural competency assessments throughout the Sterling Group, with results to be made public, ensuring transparency and accountability in the organization's efforts to address discriminatory practices. Several civil rights activists in attendance exchanging satisfied looks as the judge establishes clear mechanisms for ongoing oversight. Judge Rodriguez addresses Sterling directly, her tone firm as she emphasizes how his position of privilege carry a responsibility to lead by example rather than perpetuate discrimination, her words serving as both a rebuke of his past behavior and a challenge to demonstrate meaningful change moving forward. The courtroom watches as Sterling finally shows signs of genuine recognition, his carefully maintained facade cracking as the judge describes how his actions had affected not just Angela but every employee who had witnessed or experienced similar treatment, his public humiliation now complete as he faces the full consequences of his discriminatory behavior. The judge concludes by noting how the case represents an opportunity for broader change in corporate culture, her verdict establishing precedents that would influence how similar cases are handled in the future, while providing clear guidelines for addressing workplace discrimination in all its forms. Angela rises as the judge prepares to conclude the proceedings, her quiet strength unchanged from that night at LeBlanc, when she had transformed an attempt at humiliation into a moment of triumph. Her victory, now extending beyond personal vindication to create lasting change for others facing similar discrimination. The afternoon sun continues its journey across the courtroom floor as Judge Rodriguez concludes the proceedings, her final words emphasizing how the verdict represents not an ending but a beginning, requiring ongoing commitment to creating workplaces where every employee is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their position or background. The weight of historical significance settling over the courtroom as the case that began with a piano performance concludes with the promise of lasting change.